welcome along to another edition of They Once Raced Here. I'm Ed Sadler, pleasure to be joined by Chris Ganly. All right, Chris, I'll follow you down the highway. We've made our way along the coast to this beautiful property at Suma Park. Now, there's a lot of racing history here. Before we get to all of that, where was the old racecourse?
So, the old racecourse was here. There were actually several racecourses, but the main one was down the bottom there, Ed, where you can see most of those houses. This property at the time was about 671 acres, so quite a large piece of land. A gentleman called James Wilson built a racecourse on this property. He was a very well-known prominent breeder, trainer and owner of racehorses, and he built this for his own private purposes on this property. And he also built a straight track that came up the hill that he used to train his horses for Flemington. It gave him a great advantage over other trainers, so he's probably a little bit ahead of his time. There are many stories around Wilson in particular. His very famous St Albans stud back in Geelong, where he bred and trained a number of fantastic horses out of. Not only did James Wilson own this and use this as a property, another gentleman, Donald Smith Wallace, bought it off him for a short period of time. He was also a very well-known and very prominent horse owner. He owned Karma and Mentor that won the Caulfield and Melbourne Cups. He owned a little horse, you may have heard of it, Carbine. So a little bit later, we're going to go and have a look at some of the stables, and Carbine would have been in that stable at some point in time. There were a number of very well-known horses that were housed and in the stables here at Suma Park.
As far as racing was concerned here, a once-a-year meeting.
So they raced here, Ed, started in 1888 and went through to about 1902 when there was a break. They picked up again in 1946 and ran through till 1952. So quite a big break in there and not a lot of racing in the grand scheme of things, but some very important racing and some very important people in the history of racing here in Victoria. A long racing history here for the Queenscliff Race Club, which is interesting in itself because technically we're not in Queenscliff. Technically we're either on Marcus Hill or in Point Lonsdale. But let's not ruin the story. But this was where the Queenscliff Racecourse was and was situated here for quite a while.
Well, one unique way to get to the races here at Suma Park was by train, not just for the people, but also for the horses, Chris.
Wow, so here's the train coming in right now, Ed. So yeah, absolutely. These courses, there wasn't a lot of mass transport in those days, right? So the train was a really important way, not only for the people, but a really important way to get the horses here as well. And here's an example of it coming through here right now.
All right. I can understand why it would have taken people a little while to get from Melbourne to here if this is the speed of the train back then too, Chris.
Great platform, great access to the racecourse. The original platform wasn't here, it was more like 350 metres down there, but you get the general gist of using a platform as a way to bring the horses and the people here.
And I guess I should say unique for this day and age, not unique back at that time. No. The other way that people used to get to the races at Suma Park, steamer. Yeah,
so the Ozone in particular, steamer from Melbourne would come down to Queenscliff, and people would catch that and then come out of Queenscliff either on a train or some sort of form of transport out of Queenscliff to here.
It was an annual race meeting on a private track essentially, but it did attract decent crowds.
Yeah, absolutely. There were reports of up to 2,000 people here. If they hadn't have charged so much for entry, sometimes they would have got more. But 2,000 people, back in the day, that's a lot of people to go to the races.
All right, the Q train, nice lunch. You'll shout next time,
absolutely.
I think, Chris. Walking through the old homestead, you do feel like you're going back in time, and there's a lot of the history preserved here, including this beautiful window for Bryce. And Chris, I don't think we'll ever see a 3-year-old filly do what she did in 1876, winning the Derby, beating the boys, then winning the Cup, and then just to top it all off, winning the Oaks.
And don't forget that in her prep just before that up in Sydney, she'd won the Doncaster as well, right? So not a bad effort. So yeah, the Bryce window. James Wilson had this window, this lovely stained glass window made in England for Bryce, obviously to commemorate her winning of the 1876 Melbourne Cup. An amazing effort for that horse. The Bryce Window, just a great memento for a wonderful filly.
Well, we spoke before, Chris, about Bryce and what she was able to do in her incredible career. Carbine's name will live in immortality, really, what he was able to achieve to win a Melbourne Cup with 66 kilos. This is where they would have called home.
Absolutely, so what a lovely facility here. 12 boxes in here, a great home for some of these horses. We definitely know Carbine was here. Great facility, preserved so well. Just such a beautiful building and, a great example of the past. And bringing your horses here, what a great spot to have your horse stabled and put away in here, not out in the weather, lovely facility.
And you do feel like when you come here that you are visiting a historic stable, given the way it's all set up, preserved. They're nice big boxes, 12 boxes overall in the barn too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think originally there were 24, so I think there was a second stable here. These two gentlemen, James Wilson and Donald Smith Wallace, they were big breeders, big trainers, so they needed facilities like this to house their very, very valuable, very important thoroughbreds.
Now, unless we're liking Back to the Future, where you get in your DeLorean and you do go back to the past, unfortunately we can't do that. But fortunately, Chris, this model gives us a bit of an idea, a closer idea of what Suma Park would have all looked like at its heyday.
I've never seen one of these before. This is the only one I've seen, and you're absolutely right. Whilst it's not particularly good and it's definitely not to scale, it does give you an idea of what Suma Park and the private facility for Wilson and Wallace looked like. Even the train is here, right, showing that the train did run along, definitely alongside of the course. Then down there we've got some other training facilities. So you can see a shorter training facility in the middle. The bottom one in the bottom right-hand corner there, that's the Queenscliff racecourse. So that is actually the course. Now it's very, very small. It was obviously a lot larger than that. So this actual facility had 3 training tracks, and one of those 3 that was used for the Queenscliff Racing Club. It says it was built to model how it looked 50 years ago. Would indicate to me that it was probably created sometime in the 1930s when this facility was in its heyday.
Chris, it's been terrific to come here to Suma Park and to see a place with so much history, so much of it still intact. From a racing point of view, racing finished over where the old course was in 1952. What's this property used for now in 2025?
Yeah, so it exists these days as more of a convention wedding type facility.
When we started this project together, you said there were around 1,000 different locations where they once raced at. Where are you taking me next?
Well, we've done the beach. I think we've done the Ballerina down here, Ed, so I think next time we'll head up to the country. We'll go looking for some stuff in the country.
All right, looking forward to that. Chris, thank you so much. Join us next time when we take you somewhere where they once raced at.